7 years ago, we saw the release of Proton, Valve's wine fork and collection of software that really made Linux gaming actually a thing now. Because yes, you could use Wine before, but it was like a big collection of hacks and configuration and nonsense, and Proton was actually making it approachable and was built directly into the Steam client. 3 years after that, we saw the release of the Steam Deck, and this really changed the face of Linux gaming forever, because whilst Proton existed, it still required you to go and install a Linux distro, like Ubuntu, like Arch, like, I don't know, Fedora, or anything else out there. Pick your poison. But the Steam Deck gave regular people a window into Linux that didn't require that. It was just a gaming device that they could buy from a company that they knew about that really cared about gaming. And it really changed a lot of opinions about Linux gaming. People finally realized that Linux gaming wasn't a joke anymore. Like, this was a real thing you could do. Yes, there are problems. Yes, there are anti-cheat issues, all of this stuff, but a lot of things just worked. But it did create a bit of a problem from people paying a bit less attention than I would like. The Steam Deck is amazing hardware, and the Steam Deck comes with SteamOS. SteamOS is where the problem exists. Not because SteamOS is bad. SteamOS, in fact, is great. And that's the problem, because there are people out there, even to this day, who seem to think gaming only works on SteamOS, or gaming is only good on SteamOS, and SteamOS is like the second coming of Christ. This is what we need on generic hardware to make Linux actually viable. And a big part of the blame for this goes to really big tech channels who constantly talk about SteamOS being important, having no idea what they're talking about, no matter what people in the Linux space keep saying that it doesn't matter, that everything else is going to be perfectly fine, or even better, on your generic hardware. And whilst the Steam Deck may not have created the handheld PC device class, what it did do is invigorate it. And when people think of a gaming PC handheld, the Steam Deck is usually the first thing you think of. I would be very surprised if it wasn't the best-selling one so far. After the Steam Deck came out, though, there have been various other devices released. The problem, though, is many of those are running just bone stock Windows, which does have a lot better support in terms of gaming. Handheld Windows, though, is just not great. Like, even if you're just running Steam Big Picture mode on the device, and it looks like you're running a Steam Deck interface, it's still Windows at its core, it still has Windows Update, it still tries to get in your way of things, it still is just an absolute mess that is not made for a small device. Let alone the issues with battery life, and you have a big whole issue there. So there have been people taking these devices and then installing Linux on them, and that is awesome. But there's also been devices either coming out soon or already released running Linux out of the box. And through all of that, the Steam Deck and SteamOS has remained king. But there is the chance for an upcoming device to throw a giant monkey wrench into the equation. The ROG Xbox Ally and ROG Xbox Ally X, which is just genuinely terrible naming, but it's exactly what I would expect from a device where Xbox is involved. I don't know what they're doing with naming nowadays. I don't know how that got approved. So the Ally is the lower tier device. This is featuring an AMD Ryzen Z2A, 16GB of memory, and 512GB of storage. The Ally X is an AMD Ryzen AI Z2 Extreme, 24GB of memory, and 1TB of storage. Pricing is currently unknown, but considering the existing Ally X, the non-Xbox version, goes for 900 USD, I would assume it's somewhere in the same range, and then the Ally is probably like $100, $150 cheaper. So we have known that Microsoft has been cooking something up involving handheld devices. We saw this a few months back, and there's been rumors a lot longer than that. Xbox's new hardware plans begin with a gaming handheld set for later this year, with full next-gen consoles targeting at 2027. But earlier than that, back in 2024, there was the "This is an Xbox" ad. And I'm going to mute the audio because DMCA. Let's go ahead to right about here. So she is holding what appears to be the older version of the ROG Ally, or Ally X, or whatever the hell the name is. Now, the point of this campaign was to be an ad for Game Pass, right? If the device has Game Pass, you can play Xbox games on it. Doesn't matter if it's a TV, a phone, a laptop, the Xbox, a handheld device. If it has Game Pass, you're playing Xbox games, so it's basically an Xbox, right? Like that's the logic they were going for here. Now, a lot of people mocked this at the time because this seemed really stupid. It seemed like what are you doing, right? Like, they've produced these consoles the entire time. The console is the Xbox, not everything running Game Pass is an Xbox. But, like, I understand the logic they're going for here. It was kind of clear that they weren't planning to make a handheld device themselves. Instead, they want to focus more on the software and distribution side. Now, I will let other tech channels go and talk about the amazingness of the ROG Xbox Ally X. Again, giant handful of a name, giant mouthful there. I'll let them go and talk about how amazing this particular device is. I don't care about the hardware itself. This is so much bigger than one or two single handhelds. This device is debuting what I'm going to call Windows 11 Xbox Edition. Now, it's unclear fully the extent of low-level changes being made, but this device is going to run Windows 11, but not the Windows 11 that you would install on a regular system. At least for now. But from interviews that have been done so far, because they're kind of like, it's early days and they don't want to say everything till the device actually comes out, they understand that Windows is not great on handhelds, right? Like, it's not a great controller experience. It's not a great touch experience. It's very heavy, both in battery usage and just general system spec usage. And what they're going to be doing is pretty much any non-essential to gaming process just doesn't get loaded. Now, to what extent is that going to be? Are they going to keep the telemetry stuff in the background? We don't really know. Things like that are kind of under wraps until the device actually comes out. But they are so far quoting 2 gigabytes less RAM usage when the device is idling, with more optimizations to come in the future. And this is a bit more suspicious, but they're also claiming triple efficiency of standby battery usage over regular Windows. Now, do I believe those numbers? No. No, I don't believe those numbers. But I do believe you are idling with less RAM usage, and if you're idling using less system resources, naturally you're going to be using less battery life. How much is that going to be? Probably somewhere between 0 and triple. But the far more visible change is the shell. Just at an entry level, being able to log into the device using a controller. The thing you want to be doing if you're using a handheld gaming device. You don't want to have to go and plug in a keyboard or fiddle around with the barely functional touchscreen interface for doing things like this. All of that's just been improved. They just copied SteamOS and just did that because it's just better. And then once you're logged in, giving you an interface that just makes sense for a handheld. Gives you an interface that isn't the regular Windows interface where you're on a desktop and it's made around a mouse. Giving you an interface that is made to be used with a controller, which is obviously very heavily inspired by the work they've done on their consoles, the work that SteamOS has done, and honestly, I think it looks really good. It might not be the design language you totally vibe with, but this is clearly something made from the ground up for use on this device. Along with nice things like an application switcher that just makes sense on a controller. Everything about this is clearly designed for use with a controller. Now, we haven't seen every single thing of this system. It's unclear if there's going to be a desktop mode like you have on SteamOS. it seems like it would make sense to do so. But it's, under wraps, nobody really knows yet. I'm sure somebody knows, but nobody's talking about it at least. What we do know is that if you plug a device in and it needs some process running in the background, driver running in the background, it will go and load that up as you need it, and then when you get rid of the device, theoretically, should go and clean up those processes. Another thing also unclear is how updates are going to be handled. Whether they're going to be Windows-like, especially modern Windows-like, where they just get in your way. There's an update to be done now, so you're going to do the update now. Whether it be more like a real operating system, where you either update when the user goes to shut down because you've downloaded it in the background, or you update when the user clicks the update button. I would hope it does something like that. Just copy SteamOS. Just do what SteamOS does, where you click the update button, and then you reboot the system, and the update's done. It doesn't force you to update when it tells you to update. It just gives you a little notification saying, hey, there's an update here. Do it when you feel like it. I would hope it's more console-y, more real operating system-y, which is not a real word, where it will update when you tell it to update. It doesn't interrupt you when you're trying to play your video games, because that would be annoying, wouldn't it? Microsoft. Now, of course, they want you to be using Game Pass and the Microsoft Store and Xbox Game Streaming and all that stuff, but this is a collaboration between ASUS and Microsoft, and it's still a handheld PC. And what's the biggest game store on PC? Steam. And they've shown in one of the demos Battle.net running. And, there's other things like Epic and Ubisoft and various other things that might exist. And what they want to do is sort of create a unified interface for gamers where all of your games are just there and easily accessible and easily findable, so you don't have to worry about where those games are, and you can just play the games as you want to. The software might have some ROG branding on it, but this is a partnership with the Xbox team, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of the work being done here goes on to influence the next Xbox device that comes out, because there have been rumors floating around that the next Xbox is basically just gonna be a PC that is gonna have support for the Steam store. Now, of course, early rumors, you can't really put that much weight into them, but here is a device that exists right now that is an Xbox branded device that is doing exactly that. And the reason why I care about all this isn't because of the ROG Xbox Ally X and how well that device is going to sell and how that's going to disrupt the market of the Steam Deck. It won't. It's a $900 USD device. That's not going to happen. But there's no indication that this version of Windows is going to be exclusive to ASUS or going to be exclusive even to handheld devices. I wouldn't be surprised if we see more partnerships, or even just not even a partnership going forward, where they go and use this version of Windows on another handheld by some other random company. Or even more so, I wouldn't be surprised if Microsoft releases this as a new version of Windows, or makes it an option as part of the Windows installation, where if you want to install a clean, lightweight version of Windows specifically for gaming, you could go and do so. Because Microsoft is not dumb. They see what is happening in the gaming space. They've seen those reports of games running better on Linux than they run on Windows, because Windows is just incredibly heavy. Once the anti-cheat problem is dealt with on Linux, if Microsoft doesn't do anything, Linux is going to be the better choice for gamers. They know that this is a place that they can lose out users on. This modified version of Windows is way too much work to be done for it to die on just 2 devices that ASUS release, and probably won't sell exceptionally well. They'll sell fine, but they're not going to do Steam Deck numbers. But a Windows Gaming Edition, now that's gonna do numbers. That is gonna get a lot more people, a lot more interested in Windows. But this raises a question for the Steam Deck and Linux handhelds in general. What sort of position does that leave them in, right? When it was the only game in town, the Steam Deck, it makes sense for a lot of people who aren't Linux people. I like the Steam Deck because I like Linux, but for someone who they don't care about their operating system, or they're already a Windows user, they already deal with that. If this version of Windows becomes more widely available on more handheld devices, or just generally on a PC, I don't really know where the device kind of sits there. Of course, Valve still beats everything on pricing because they're able to like sell a powerful device, make it cheaper, and then make the money back on selling games like is done with a console. But software-wise, like, this version of Windows is very compelling for someone who's just a regular gamer. But what do you think? Do you think this version of Windows is gonna go anywhere? Do you think it's gonna expand out to more devices, become generally available? And what do you think that means for regular gamers and Linux? I'd love to know. So, if you like video, especially if it has a desktop mode, that's especially true. So, if you like video, go like video. If you really like video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon, subscribe, Pay, link in the description down below. That's gonna be it for me, and are you a gamer?
Something like this.